Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us for the Science of Insomnia. I'm Greg Berry, Director of Communications in the Office of Alumni Affairs. Since this is a virtual setting, please excuse issues that may pop up. And if you have problems with video or audio, click the reconnect button on your screen to get back to the presentation quickly. As we begin, we're going to launch a poll. We just want to ask our live audience, how would you describe the quality of your sleep? Very poor, you wake up a lot and have difficulty falling asleep. Poor, you might wake up a few times and your sleep is restless. Fair, there might be a disturbance here or there, but sleep is generally restful. Good, you don't really ever wake up and typically feel rested. Or maybe it's excellent. You sleep through the night and always feel refreshed. We're going to leave the poll question up for a bit so you can submit the response that best reflects you. A heads up to our live audience, this webinar is being recorded. Once it's been uploaded to our website, you'll get an email with the link. The webinar is the latest in our The Science of series. These are some of the most popular webinars we've hosted. On your screen, you can see all of the other Science of presentations we've had. You can check out the complete library of the Science of webinars at alumni.uab.edu/science series. Today, we're excited to welcome Dr. Christina Pierpaoli Parker. Dr. Parker is an associate professor of clinical psychology and a board-certified behavioral sleep medicine doctor at UAB. Her research focuses on brief behavioral interventions for psychiatric and chronic health conditions. She is also director of UAB's Integrated Behavioral Medicine Service. Now, before we officially welcome Dr. Parker, here are the results. I'm going to end that poll. 40% of our audience, Dr. Parker, say poor sleep. 27% say fair, 26% say very fair. Now, as a follow-up before we turn things over to you, we want to know what factors are kind of hindering your sleep, affecting you, stress or anxiety. You should see the responses on your screen now. Stress or anxiety, physical discomfort or pain, environmental factors like noise, light, temperature, irregular sleep schedules, or diet or caffeine intake. We're going to keep this up for a while. And now, welcome, Dr. Park. And I hope I didn't butcher the name too much. I had the phonetical spelling.
Well, I was thinking two things. One, I was thinking about how impressed I was that you had such a thoughtful set of survey questions and how well you pronounced my maiden name. So bravo to you,
thank you.
Mr. Greg. Thank you so much for your generous and kind introduction. I'm Dr. Christina Pierpaoli Parker, board certified clinical psychologist specializing in adult and geriatric behavioral medicine. And today it delights me to introduce to you my talk on understanding and treating insomnia with a specific focus on cognitive behavioral management strategies for prevention and management. Before we get started, always like to start off on a note of gratitude. Sincerest thanks to you, Greg, for facilitating, and also more broadly to the UAB National Alumni Association. I hope this adds value to you, your communities, and your families. So let's start off with a brief overview of today's discussion. What can you expect to learn? What are the anticipated products and deliverables? Number one, I'll start with explaining what insomnia is and what it isn't. Review the epidemiology, so how prevalent and disabling it is. Explore how it develops from a theoretical and scientific perspective, and then delve into practical management strategies for symptoms, focusing on non-pharmacological behavioral interventions and distilling it even further into how you can start improving your sleep today and tonight. And of course, we'll conclude with an opportunity to ask any questions or provide any commentary. So, what is insomnia? Well, insomnia is a predominant complaint of dissatisfaction with sleep quantity or quality that is associated with either difficulties falling asleep, so initiating sleep, maintaining sleep, or waking up too early. I call it the rule of three because for someone to meet clinical criteria for chronic, not acute insomnia, it needs to be difficulties with falling asleep, staying asleep, or waking up too early for at least 3 nights per week for at least 3 months. 1, 2, 3. This is Very different from acute insomnia, which is totally normal and adaptive. It's the occasional night of having difficulties falling asleep or staying asleep, and often resolves with time. For someone to meet clinical criteria, the symptoms need to persist for at least 3 nights per week, for at least 3 months, and cannot be better explained by something else. As a clinical psychologist, it's not enough to think about symptoms. We can have symptoms for all sorts of things all of the time without them really having any clinically significant meaning. What we always want to focus on is distress and impairment. So not only do these sleep issues need to happen for at least 3 nights, for at least 3 months, they really need to bother you. They need to cause distress and impairment. And it turns out insomnia is incredibly prevalent, incredibly costly, and incredibly impairing. So from a pure epidemiology perspective, it is the most prevalent of all sleep disorders in the United States and in the world. It's part of the reason why your data tracks so well with the broader data. It's not surprising that nearly 50% of the participants today have endorsed difficulties with sleep. But it is more common among women than men, with a ratio of about 2 to 1. And the estimated prevalence is about 10% of the adult population, even though that's probably overrepresented in medical settings like primary care or UAB more broadly. More specifically, it's about 10 to 20% of patients in the primary care setting. But more importantly, insomnia is associated with incredibly high medical, psychiatric, and psychosocial burden. So in the United States alone, the estimated cost of insomnia is upwards of $100 billion, which reflects direct and indirect costs like lost productivity, so presenteeism, which is where you're at work physically, but cognitively, emotionally, psychologically, you're absent, accidents, and disproportionate use of healthcare resources. But on a more proximal level, for patients who are experiencing insomnia, chronic insomnia is associated with loss of motivation, cognitive complaints, mood dysregulation, increases in anxiety and depressive symptoms, interpersonal conflict, difficulties with cognition, memory, attention, focus, and just a general sense of ennui and fatigue that can materially interfere with the things that people want and need to do. And that's why it matters, because it gets in the way of living the life that you want to live. There are lots of myths, as you might imagine, about what insomnia is and what it isn't. So let's keep it concrete. Insomnia is not an insufficient opportunity to sleep. In other words, it can't be better explained by the lack of time to sleep, which is tied and tethered very intensely and intimately with socioeconomic barriers to good sleep. So for example, many patients who, as you might imagine, work more than one job report poor sleep. And it's not because they have difficulties falling asleep. It's not because they have difficulties staying asleep. It's because they don't have the opportunity to sleep. That is a very different matter, and one could argue is not a clinical matter at all, as a socioeconomic one. Insomnia also isn't a moral failing. It's not due to merely, poor sleep hygiene or lack of hygienic sleep or wake behaviors. Certainly contributory, certainly necessary, but not sufficient. And it's also not the 1 or 2 bad nights of sleep every so often that every single human across time and space has experienced. This is a chronic, impairing, debilitating clinical syndrome that interferes with functioning and bothers you. It's also not obstructive sleep apnea, though it can sometimes look similarly. So in obstructive sleep apnea, essentially, there's something that is blocking the breathing and the brain wakes you up. What a wonderful fail-safe that brain has. And because of those difficulties maintaining sleep, right, staying asleep, people may often believe that they're experiencing insomnia when really they're experiencing an obstructive sleep apnea issue, which requires different intervention, most often CPAP. And so just a practical few pearls of wisdom here. If you are someone, contrary to popular belief, you are someone who falls asleep very quickly and or has been told that you snore or wake up gasping for air, or that you feel fatigued during the day and have a history of hypertension or obesity, you may be at risk for sleep apnea and should consider talking to your medical provider about that and potentially pursuing an overnight sleep study. Falling asleep very quickly, usually in less than 5 minutes, is often touted as a sign of sleep health, when really it suggests underlying suspicion for either sleep deprivation or sleep apnea. And finally, it's not a circadian rhythm or other sleep disorder like narcolepsy or hypersomnia or difficulties with circadian misalignment. So things like jet lag or being prone to being a night owl or an early bird. It's not a circadian issue completely. It is a psychophysiological one. So what does this all mean? Instead, insomnia is kind of like an equation. You can think about insomnia as equaling high psychophysiological arousal and low sleep drive. So let me break that down even further. So psychophysiological arousal are basically inputs that activate the sympathetic nervous system, right? That fight, flight, or freeze system that's designed to help you outrun predators. So things that make the body feel threatened and activated, like worry, anxiety, caffeine, and clock watching. So in other words, insomnia emerges, right, when the nervous system is chronically activated in that state of psychophysiological arousal, and, right, the body is not hungry enough to sleep, which refers to that homeostatic sleep drive. So insomnia equals high psychophysiological arousal and low homeostatic sleep drive. So to treat insomnia, we basically clinically need to increase the body's hunger for sleep and decrease psychophysiological arousal. So decrease the sense of urgency within that nervous system. So, okay, so what does this all mean, and what does this tell us about how insomnia develops? To answer this, we have to learn a little bit about the processes regulating human sleep and wakefulness. Going back to sleep drive, right? How the body gets hungry for sleep. So to understand sleep drive, or the body's hunger for sleep, we need to understand the two drives that regulate sleep and work synergistically and reciprocally to keep us awake and asleep. And those two drives are called the homeostatic sleep drive and the circadian drive. The homeostatic sleep drive refers to the propensity to sleep with increased time spent awake, right? So increased time spent awake means more accumulated sleep pressure. I like to call it sleep hunger to fall asleep. And you can actually think about this like hunger, right? If you went for a long period of time without eating and then were invited to a buffet, you would eat a lot in a short period of time. The homeostatic sleep drive is similar and simple. The longer you stay awake, the sleepier you become. The more you need to sleep, the longer and deeper you will sleep once you get the chance. But if that were the only system at play, we would sleep haphazardly, divorced from whatever time of day it was. And so the second drive comes into play, the circadian drive. And the circadian drive refers to variations in the biological processes of the central pacemaker that regulate or promote arousal at certain times of day. So the circadian drive promotes or inhibits the propensity to sleep throughout the roughly 24-hour circadian rhythm. So it's that endogenous biological clock that's about 24 hours, right? Circadian meaning about a day, though there is some variability. For some people it's slightly shorter, for some people it's slightly longer. And this regulates our sleep timing. Without it, we would sleep haphazardly according to the duration of our wakefulness. And what we know is that sleeping at suboptimal circadian times can produce more of that psychophysiological arousal, and can also produce objective and subjective impairments in sleep quality, architecture, so how sleep is designed, and how consolidated it is, which affects our overall health. And things like light and hormones and temperature can affect this, but it's also part of the reason why people with a history of shift work, like flight attendants or night workers, tend, epidemiologically at least, to report higher levels of cancer. It's actually, shift work has actually been deemed a probable carcinogen by the World Health Organization, because the evidence is so clear that circadian misalignment produces objective and subjective impairments in health and wellness. So these two sleep drives work together, work synergistically and reciprocally to regulate sleep and wakefulness. And I'll break this down for you. So as the drive, right, as that homeostatic drive for sleep increases during the day, our circadian drive for alertness also increases, which of course stimulates us to remain awake and alert during the day. So you can listen to me drone on about insomnia, despite, right, the rising pressure to fall asleep. But at night, when the circadian drive for alertness is reduced, right, but the homeostatic drive for sleep remains high, we can fall asleep. So we need that inversion of low circadian, high homeostatic to create this discrepancy that's nice and big so we feel sleepy. In the morning, awakening occurs when that circadian drive for alertness surpasses the homeostatic drive for sleep. And alignment between these two processes helps to promote proper functioning during the day and to aid sleep onset and maintenance at night. So when there is dyssynchrony or dysregulation between these two systems, we not only see impairments in the body's hunger for sleep, but we also see an increased hyperarousal, or that psychophysiological activation at bedtime that makes the nervous system basically feel like there's a saber-toothed tiger waiting around the corner, which, as you might imagine, is antithetical to good sleep. But these processes, right, which are endogenous to every human being, so the homeostatic drive, the circadian drive, these processes interact with the host, and the host is you, the person, right? And so the 3P model, which stands for predisposing, precipitating, and perpetuating, this model helps psychologists and other health providers to understand how people become vulnerable to developing chronic insomnia. And so it helps us to identify contextual factors for the etiology, pathogenesis, and treatment of disease. In other words, it helps us to understand how the disease emerged, identify its targets for treatment, and sources of prevention. So what does this all mean? Basically, this model says that people who go on to develop insomnia are predisposed to it, right? So these are predisposing factors. These are the things over which we have no control over that make us vulnerable to developing a disease. So it might be genes, it might be being female, it might be a genetic predisposition to anxiety. So these are things that are there beneath the surface. And then boom, precipitating factors strike the host. So precipitating factors are external stressors or events, which can be positively or negatively valenced, right? They can be good things like getting married or having a kid. They can be not so good things like getting divorced or being recently diagnosed with a terminal disease that basically take the person over the clinical threshold. And then in their attempts to cope with sleep, these perpetuating factors, so the things that perpetuate and maintain the disease, take them from acute to chronic issues. And perpetuating factors are things like trying hard to sleep, spending excessive time awake in the bed, napping, caffeine. So to summarize, someone goes on to develop insomnia because they are predisposed to it. Something stressful happens in the environment that activates the underlying vulnerability. And then in their attempts to cope with the sleep issue, these patients develop behaviors, whether they're cognitive or behavioral, that keep them stuck in their symptoms. And so behavioral treatments for insomnia, which we're going to discuss in just a moment, help to target these perpetuating factors, help to target the things that keep people stuck. So to treat insomnia then, based off of these theoretical models, right, our job, my job as a clinical sleep psychologist, is to do a few things. One, to increase the body's hunger for sleep, so to increase the homeostatic sleep drive. Two, to create alignment or synchrony between these two endogenous symptoms to reduce hyperarousal. And then three, to target those perpetuating factors, so the things that people learn to do to cope with their disease, to and to interrupt that pattern. So to target the perpetuating factors that maintain misalignment and promote that psychophysiological arousal. Okay, so again, as we get into behavioral management strategies, let's remember our formula. Insomnia equals low sleep drive plus high arousal. Treatment, therefore, equals a higher sleep drive and lower arousal. So we want to increase sleep drive and reduce arousal, right? Okay, great, Christina. All this theory, all these fancy words and phrases. What does this all mean practically? What do we do about it? How do we treat it? Okay, so how do we treat it? We treat it in lots of ways, but the gold standard evidence-based treatment is something called cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, or CBTI for short. And it's the #1 non-pharmacological treatment for chronic insomnia. So let me tell you a little bit more about it. So CBTI is an evidence-based multi-component therapy, which means it's got several different parts to it that targets the behavioral and psychosocial features of chronic insomnia. And it's considered the first-line gold standard treatment for chronic insomnia per the American College of Physicians, the American Academy of Sleep Medicine. And it's actually incredibly brief, usually about 4 to 8 visits, but in the primary care setting in which I work, sometimes it's as brief as 2 to 3 visits, and that's called brief behavioral therapy, which is an adapted form of this to conform to the fast-paced setting of a primary care clinic. And here's the best part: in clinical trials, because it's been studied extensively, CBTI compared to medications outperforms, meaning it does better and patients report fewer symptoms, has more effective, durable outcomes. In other words, people get better and stay better for a longer period of time, is more cost effective, has fewer side effects. It does have side effects, but the side effects tend to be quite nice. And most patients prefer it, and most physicians prefer it, because sleep medications, particularly for older adults, actually have a black box warning. And it sounds scary because it is scary. Sleep or hypnotic medications like Ambien or Lunesta, or even a similar class of medications known as benzodiazepines, when used for a prolonged period of time, are associated with premature mortality, morbidity, increased fall risk, and as well as cognitive and mood complaints. And so CBTI is based on the cognitive behavioral model, okay? And CBTI assumes a few things. So it assumes that thoughts, so the judgments we make automatically about things that happen outside of us, that thoughts influence how we feel, and how we feel, so the emotions we experience as a metabolized byproduct of thoughts, influence what we do. And what we do or don't do can influence our physical health and our symptoms. And so people with insomnia, but also people with anxiety, depression, panic, PTSD, may think and behave, right, in certain ways that maintain insomnia, right? Develop these perpetuating factors that keep them stuck in their symptoms. And CBTI gives them the skills, the thinking skills, so cognitive skills, and the doing skills, the behavioral skills, to interrupt those unhelpful ways of thinking and behaving. And so based off of those assumptions, multi-component includes 5 specific components. And those skills and components include sleep education, relaxation training, sleep efficiency training, or formerly known as time in bed compression or restriction, which are basically tools for increasing homeostatic sleep drive and circadian alignment, as well as stimulus control, which is learning how to use your bed appropriately. We'll talk about that in a moment. And cognitive tools, so learning how to either Identify and challenge unhelpful thoughts. Oh, I'm not going to be able to function tomorrow. What if I can't fall back asleep? This is a catastrophe. Or just learning how to observe rather than to absorb catastrophic thoughts. All right. So great. Again, Dr. PP, get to the practical matter. What can we do about it today? What can we do about it tonight? And I'm so glad you asked. And by the way, so much of our sleep has lots to do, but not as much to do with our evening as much as it has to do with our day. So a good night starts with a good day, and a good day starts with a good night. So remember, per the CBT model, how we think, right, influences how we feel, and how we feel influences what we do. And remember, what we do or don't do influences our health outcomes and our symptoms, like insomnia. So first things first, I love to start every practical component of this talk with this piece of information. And it's something I believe I will die on this hill, okay? Contrary to the zeitgeist, contrary to what you have been told by everyone, everywhere, all of the time, you do not need 8 hours of sleep. I'll say it again. You do not need 8 hours of sleep. You need the amount of sleep after which you feel rested and functional during the day. You need the amount of sleep after which you feel like you can do the things you want and need to do in a satisfactory way. And there is significant variability within and between people in terms of your total sleep need across the lifespan. Don't believe me? When you were 18 months old, like my son, the amount of sleep you needed then is not the amount of sleep you needed at 18, and it's not going to be the amount of sleep that you need at 81. Or thinking of it in a different way, the amount of sleep you need is probably not the amount of sleep that Jalen Hurts or Michael Phelps needs. In the same way that the amount of calories they need is probably not the same amount of calories you need. So the first thing I want to say is total sleep time is a recommendation, is a framework. It is not a rigid prescription, and your sleep need is going to vary significantly within your lifetime and also within seasons of that lifetime. For example, when you're sick, you need more sleep than when you're not. So it is really, really important, first things first, that you have accurate, empowering information to correct any misconceptions you have about your sleep, because this belief or idea that you need 8 hours perpetuates and promotes so much unnecessary suffering. You need the amount of sleep after which you feel well rested. All of that said, tracking can be a first step in trying to change any behavior, especially our sleep. So a really good example of this is, I actually stole this from Dave Ramsey, who's the esteemed financial advisor, who said, if you want to start saving money, you don't just start by saving money, you have to describe the problem. And so for 1 week, right, or 2 weeks, just log what you're spending your money on and how much you're spending, right? And with the idea being that, like, at the end of those 2 weeks, you realize, oh my gosh, I'm spending $100, $125 on coffee. I mean, right? So tracking is often the first helpful step in trying to change any behavior. And frankly, in mild cases of inefficient sleep or acute insomnia or even mild chronic insomnia, tracking can be enough to sort of course correct things, because it brings awareness to some unhelpful habits. So for example, you might find that, my naps are really, really long during the day. They're 2 hours. I have a fixed need for sleep. So maybe one thing I can start doing is making my naps briefer. Or I'm noticing I'm having caffeine really late in the afternoon. Caffeine has a half-life of 6 to 8 hours. Maybe I'm going to cut my caffeine intake off by 12 o'clock. Again, usually not necessary and sufficient for curing chronic insomnia, but certainly a helpful first step in collecting, in a disinterested way, data about some of those perpetuating factors that may be getting in the way of your healing. But as I have mentioned, people with chronic insomnia need more than information and tracking, in the same way that people with cavities, right, need more than dental hygiene, right? At that point, the hole is already there. The pathology is already present. We actually need to do something a bit more significant. So remember, we have two basic aims, right? We're trying to increase the body's hunger for sleep and reduce psychophysiological arousal. And so on this slide, I'm going to introduce some practical skills for increasing your body's hunger for sleep and aligning those two drives. So get out a piece of paper and a pencil. So the first thing is we want to keep a consistent wake time. Now, you've probably heard this myth that you need to go to bed and wake up at the same time every day. That's only 50% accurate. We do need to anchor our wake time. We need to, in other words, we need to keep a regular wake time every day, even on weekends. Again, this only applies to if you've got chronic insomnia or want to optimize for better sleep. So we need to keep a regular wake time every day, even on weekends, with the understanding that if you anchor that wake time, because we are on that 24-hour endogenous circadian rhythm, the likelihood that you will feel sleepy every day at the same time increases. So said differently, if you keep one variable controlled, if you control the wake time, you're basically ensuring that you're going to fall asleep at around the same time because we're on that 24-hour circadian rhythm. So starting tomorrow, and I want you to try to maintain this for a week or two, I would like for you to keep a regular wake time. I don't care what time that is. All I care about is consistency. If you anticipate that that might be difficult, I always counsel my patients to think about setting an alarm clock and putting it in a slightly inconvenient place, like across the room or in another room, such that when it sounds, you have to wake up and turn it off. So first things first is keep a regular wake time. In doing so, you ensure that you will start to feel sleepy at around the same time every day. And the body is a pattern recognition machine. Sleep loves patterns. Sleep loves predictability. The more patterns you feed it, the better it is. The second thing is starting tonight, I only want you to go to bed when you are sleepy, not tired. These are not the same things. So tired is maybe how you feel right now. It's how you feel after a long day of work or getting into a fight or argument with someone. It's a state of low physical or mental energy. Sleepy, on the other hand, is the physical inability to keep your eyes open. Your eyes feel like iron curtains. Your head is bobbling. Your body feels heavy. That is sleepy. Here's why this matters, and we'll talk about it a bit more in a few slides. If you go to bed when you're tired, you may fall asleep, but you're not going to stay asleep, or you may struggle to fall asleep. What that does is it increases the amount of time you spend awake in the bed, which then increases your risk for something called conditioned arousal, which is basically the process through which the brain learns that the bed is a place for wakefulness and not for sleep, which has some very clear and natural implications for insomnia. We'll revisit in a moment. So tonight, you're only going to bed when you feel sleepy, not tired. For the first few nights, you're just collecting data on this. Just notice your natural sleepy time, and then you can work from there with a provider to help regulate it a bit more, but only go to bed tonight when you feel sleepy, not tired. The third thing is, about an hour or so before bedtime, I really want you to practice intentionally winding down. Now, it doesn't need to be, with pomp and circumstance. It doesn't need to be ritualistic and intense. But I want you to think about a car, right? A car that's driving needs to decelerate before it turns a corner. Our sleep is very much the same way. We can't expect ourselves to fall asleep if our nervous system has been going 100 miles per hour all day. So about an hour or so before bedtime, and if you can't afford an hour, 30 minutes. And if you can't afford 30 minutes, listen, I've got 3 young kids, I get it, 15 minutes. But I want you to practice dimming the lights, putting your phone, laptop, tablet in another room. And I want you to do something relaxing, but not stimulating in low light. Light active or interrupts the production of melatonin. Melatonin is our endogenous sleepy hormone. So if I were to turn the lights off right now, my brain would start pumping out melatonin to make me sleepy. Light tells your brain, because it's a Zeitgeber, which we'll get to in a moment, it's time to be up. So tonight, low, dim light, doing something relaxing but not stimulating. That could be reading a book. It could be doing a crossword puzzle. It could be folding laundry. It could be listening to light music. One other thing that has been shown to help initiate and maintain sleep at bedtime is something called passive body heating. It's a very pretentious and fancy way of saying taking a warm bath or shower. And about 60 to 90 minutes before your habitual sleep time has been shown to reduce the core body temperature by about 2 to 3 degrees, which is requisite for initiating and maintaining sleep. So far we have keeping a regular wake time, going to bed when you're sleepy, physically can't keep your eyes open and not tired. And by the way, I know someone out there is thinking, but doc, I never feel sleepy. You do. The signal's in there. There's just too much noise. And the reason I know is because it would be like saying I never get hungry. That's physically and biologically impossible. Your body has been designed to do that. And then you're cultivating a bedtime ritual to help decelerate the metaphorical car so your nervous system is lower in that psychophysiological arousal. All right. The second broad idea here is using Zeitgebers to entrain the circadian rhythm. Is she speaking English? No, she's not. She's speaking German. Zeitgeber is German for time giver. And light is one of the most robust and reliable time givers that we have. So light, as I've mentioned, tells your body it's time to be awake. It interrupts the production of melatonin. So when you wake up in the morning, I would really like for you to experiment with trying to get 10 to 15 minutes of natural light. That could mean sitting, bonus points if you can sit outside, but that could mean sitting in front of a big window. That entrains your circadian rhythm. It tells your body it's time to wake up. It starts accumulating something called adenosine, which is important for building up that sleep drive or that sleep hunger. And it's a natural anxiolytic and natural antidepressant. Makes you feel better, makes you feel less anxious. The other thing that can really help to increase your body's hunger for sleep is daytime energy expenditure or movement or exercise, right? So not all movement is created equal. So for example, resistance training doesn't seem to have the same effect on sleep as cardiovascular activity, with cardiovascular activity yielding more value for sleep, but any movement will do, particularly if you are doing none to start. A word of caution here, there's a lot of variability here, but because exercise is thermogenic, meaning it increases your body's core temperature, it actually can be difficult for you to fall asleep after moderate to intense exercise. So experiment with yourself. There are plenty of people who can exercise and be totally fine, but most people find that exercising too close to bedtime can be antithetical to their sleep goals. So experiment with different times, generally the morning or the afternoon, and you want to break it down. It's too scary to say I have to start exercising if you haven't exercised in a while. And so, I always say if the first step feels too scary, it's because it's too big. So this is where I want you to set a SMART goal. So instead of saying I have to exercise, we're breaking it down into something that is specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound. So we're saying, no, I'm not going to exercise. I'm going to walk, right, for 20 minutes on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays from 10 o'clock until 10:20, right? We take something that's big and amorphous and overwhelming and intimidating, and we make it very, very granular, which makes it much more approachable. And when something is more approachable, we're more likely to approach it and do it and reap the behavioral rewards to make it self-reinforcing. And then we're reducing our time in bed. Again, we want to reduce psychophysiological arousal, increase time in bed, especially when we're not sleeping, confuses the signal to the brain. And the best way that we can reduce our time in bed is by eliminating naps if you currently are struggling with symptoms of chronic insomnia. And if you're in a state where you really feel like you need one, we're trying to keep those naps brief and consistent. I call it the kindergarten principle, right? So you have a nap time and you're keeping those naps to about 10 to 20 minutes. But napping in the setting of insomnia, not in all settings, right? There is actually a ton of psychological and cognitive benefits to napping in a non-pathological setting. It's kind of like eating dessert before dinner, right? You have a fixed need for sleep. If you're spending, 2 hours of sleep during the day, those 2 hours are not going to be available to you at night. Okay, so we talked about the importance of going to bed when you are sleepy and not tired, and why. Well, I can't tell you, I did my training, I did training at the VA for a bit with my veterans, and many of them would say, Doc, I don't understand. I could fall asleep anywhere. I could fall asleep in this clinic room. I tried not to take it personally. I could fall asleep in my, in my car, on my couch. But for some reason, as soon as I attempt to transition to bed, my eyes pop wide open. And this is called conditioned arousal. This is basically when you feel activated upon getting into bed. And the reason it happens is because over time, the patient has learned to pair the bed with activity, right? The bed, the place where I worry, the place where I toss and turn, the place where I eat, the place where I watch TV. The patient has learned that the bed is a place for activity and not for sleep. So in conditioned arousal, we are in stimulus control. We're relearning how to associate the bed with sleep and extinguish the association of bed with wakefulness or activity. And the way that we can do that is in 3 ways. Number 1, only going to bed when we're sleepy. Number 2, getting out of the bed when sleep starts to feel effortful or frustrating. And this is where some nuance is required. A lot of people will look at the clock, right? How long have I been doing that? That perpetuates it. So don't clock watch. If you are prone to this, I want you to turn your clock around. I want you to put a piece of tape over it. There is zero added value to that. It is just increasing that psychophysiological insomnia. So generally, the recommendation is don't stay in bed for more than 15 or 20 minutes. Again, I care less about the time and more about the subjective experience. So as soon as it starts to feel effortful or frustrating, I want you to get out of the bed, go into another room with the lights off or low, do something relaxing but not stimulating. You can listen to a relaxation script, which I'll send to you guys. You can fold laundry, you can read a book. And as soon as you start to feel sleepy again, that's when I want you to go back into your bedroom. And what you're doing there again is when you get out of bed when you can't sleep, you're extinguishing the association of bed with wakefulness, and returning to bed when you do feel sleepy restores the association of bed with sleep. And then finally, we always encourage patients to use the bed for sleep and for sex only, though of course you can have sex in other areas, but we're not using the bed for things like watching TV, for having heated conversation about bills, for making your to-do list. So go to bed when you're sleepy, get out when sleeping starts to feel effortful or frustrating, and try to restrict activities to sleep and to sex only. One way to think about this is like the kitchen table, right? You wouldn't force yourself to sit at a kitchen table or to sit at the kitchen table if you weren't hungry, right? You'd sit down and say, all right, well, I'm going to go work up an appetite, and you'd go work up an appetite, and then you'd return to the kitchen when you felt hungry again. It's very much the same with our sleep. And we have to remember your body has endogenous software to sleep. God created your body to sleep. Our job is to just create the conditions to let it unfold naturally. All right. So we talked a lot about behavioral tools, doing things that can help to increase the body's hunger for sleep and reduce psychophysiological arousal. But cognitive tools are tools that we can use to reduce the psycho and the psychophysiological arousal, tools that we can use to reduce anxiety and unhelpful and catastrophic cognitions around our sleep. So the first tool is something called worry time. One of my favorites, something I do often in my own life. Many of you may notice that your worries follow you into the bedroom, right? You can be preoccupied throughout the day, and then as soon as you get into the bed, you're thinking about your health, you're thinking about your parents, your kids, your finances, that weird mole on your shoulder, right? So worry time is a tool to help with that. And here's all you need to do. So during your morning routine, when you're waking up and you're outside getting that natural light, I want you to think about getting a notebook and getting a piece of paper and drawing a line down the center of the page so you've got 2 columns. In the first column, you're just writing down all of your worries, big or small. We're not editing or judging them. And you're not writing a story. You're just bullet points. So it's like my health, my finances, my kid, whatever. Honestly, you could stop there and feel better. Why? Well, because you've objectified your worry, and because we suffer more in imagination than in reality. And usually what happens is once you write it down and look at it, you think, it's not as bad as I thought. There's stuff here, but it's not as terrible as I thought it was. I don't want you to stop there. For every worry that you identify, I want you to write down one thing, big or small, that you could do to help make that worry a bit quieter. Now, we're not trying to fix or solve things, because some things can't be fixed or solved, but we are trying to identify one way in which we have some control or agency. So for example, if one of your worries is sleep, you're going to say, well, today I'm going to practice my relaxation script, with the idea being that if and when that worry comes to sort of assault you at bedtime, you're able to say, oh, I've already worried about you, and I have a plan, or, haven't worried about you, but if it's really that important, I'll remember it during my next scheduled worry time. So it helps to sort of restrict and compartmentalize the worry so you have a renewed sense of agency and control. The other thing I teach patients is how to identify and challenge unhelpful thoughts, and mindfulness and acceptance-based approaches. So what do I mean? So cognitive strategies are strategies that we use to identify and restructure unhelpful thoughts about sleep, right? So I work with patients to say, hey, when you have difficulties falling asleep, or when you wake up in the middle of the night, what are some of the thoughts that you have? And we capture those and we look at those. And one of those thoughts often is, oh, that's it. I'm not going to be able to function tomorrow, right? So we'll talk about how we would approach this from a cognitive perspective. But a mindfulness perspective is a little bit different. So we're in cognitive therapy, we're kind of grappling with our thoughts, and we're trying to massage out these tight knots in our thinking. With mindfulness, we're learning how to not change the thought, but change our relationship to our thought, to learn how to observe our thoughts, not absorb them. So for example, in the cognitive tradition, I would have patients identify ways in which that thinking is potentially unhelpful. And those unhelpful ways of thinking are known as distortions. And the thought that I'm not going to be able to function tomorrow is catastrophic thinking, right? Is seeing the worst possible case of a situation. Even though, right, if you've had chronic insomnia, you've had many, many nights, probably innumerable nights in which you've had a bad night and functioned the next day, maybe even functioned well, right? So in the cognitive tradition, we're identifying distortions, and then we're sort of massaging the knots out in the thinking with some Socratic questioning. And the 3 questions I like to encourage patients to ask are, is this thought accurate? So do I have the data to support this? And sometimes you do. So we need to think about other domains, but is this thought helpful, right? Is this thought working for me or against me? And the third is this compassionate? Is this something I would say to someone I love if they were in a similar state of suffering? So we're focusing on effectiveness here. And the idea is we want to go from, I'm not going to be able to function tomorrow, to tomorrow may feel challenging and I have skills to get through it and to improve my sleep. Because again, how we think, right, influences how we feel, and how we feel influences our psychophysiological arousal. In the mindfulness-based tradition, we're not doing that as much as we're learning how to look at the thoughts rather than through them. And the image I like to give people is that of the I Love Lucy episode, where she's working in the chocolate factory and she's trying to pick up all the chocolates, right? Because she can't get to them. And that's kind of what we do when we have these catastrophic negative cognitions. We're trying to pick them all up and grapple with them, and we think we need to believe everything we think. So in this tradition, I teach patients how to look at their thoughts, how to validate their thoughts. It makes sense that I'm having this thought, right? I'm having difficulty sleeping. And thank you for trying to keep me safe. But actually, there is no saber-toothed tiger. There is no fire. I'm having trouble sleeping, and I have skills to get through it. And it's sort of about seeing your thoughts as data, right? Seeing them as wise sentinels and looking at them, acknowledging them, thanking them, and putting them on the conveyor belt. They'll be back around if you need to pick them up, but we don't need to pick up every chocolate we see. Other considerations, we want to keep the bedroom environment dark, cool, and quiet for reasons that we already discussed. Darkness is soporific. It helps the brain to produce melatonin, endogenous melatonin, which we need to initiate and maintain sleep. We want to keep it cool because, we've all been here before where we've slept at our parents' house or a hotel that's too hot. It is impossible to sleep when it's too hot. Optimal temperature is somewhere between 62 and 70 degrees, though that's contested, and we want to keep it quiet. White noise machines can be particularly helpful for people, as well as eye masks. I like the Manta mask and earplugs, but some people are uncomfortable with those, especially if you're a veteran and have a history of PTSD or claustrophobia. If it doesn't work for you, just try them out. And there's emerging research to suggest that weighted blankets can also help to promote a sense of sympathetic safety and reduce psychophysiological arousal. And then we want to be mindful of our sleep-wake behavior. So caffeine, for example, has a half-life of about 6 to 8 hours, which means that even after 6 to 8 hours, 50% of that dose is still in your system. So if you are someone who's at risk for or sensitive to or vulnerable to insomnia, you might think about having your last dose of caffeine by or before 12 o'clock. Alcohol, I always say if you're going to drink during the day. I'm just kidding. Don't do that. But alcohol can certainly facilitate sleep onset, but then absolutely obliterates your sleep. So it promotes difficulties with maintaining sleep fragmentation, and can even increase your risk for nightmares and, of course, daytime dysfunction. And the same thing with nicotine. It's kind of like caffeine. Half-life is pretty long, and nicotine before bed increases that psychophysiological arousal that we're working against. So in summary, insomnia equals insufficient sleep drive plus psychophysiological arousal that's characterized by difficulties falling asleep, staying asleep, or waking up too early. That happens for at least 3 months for 3 nights per week, and it's associated with significant distress and impairment, meaning it bothers you, it gets in the way of things that you need to do. Evidence-based treatments include CBTI and aim to increase sleep drive, reduce arousal, and target the cognitive, psychological, and behavioral patterns that are perpetuating your symptoms. If you are struggling, don't hesitate to reach out to me directly. I'm happy to facilitate anything, but you can also find a CBTI provider at this link. There's some really good books available on the market if you prefer a more self-guided approach. And there are a few infographics and 2-week sleep diaries that you can use. Even if you're just curious about your sleep in the setting of good sleep, there's always probably room to optimize. So thank you so much. And now I'll pause for any questions or discussion.
And you caught me as I was opening up the PowerPoint you sent me, so I can include those on the landing page for resources once we are all done. And we will be sending that out as well. A couple of questions. I know we're up against the clock. We don't want to spill too much over 1 o'clock. So who should one contact at UAB for CBTI exactly for an appointment?
I've included my contact information here. Call that phone number, ask for an appointment with Dr. Parker in her IBEMS clinic. And if we can't help you, we probably can. We'll get you where you need to go.
Perfect. What if the bed is the only place to sit in your room?
Yeah, this is a first of all, excellent question, very common question. Yep, there are a few modifications. One, if there is room for a chair, or if there is a chair in your room, use that. If not, you can change it slightly by sitting up in your bed.
Gotcha.
Not ideal, but certainly an appropriate modification.
And the last question that we'll leave you with, and if you do have more, drop them in the chat and I'll send them over to Dr. Parker and we'll be able to get those answered. A lot of people are only aware of insomnia and sleep apnea, but they're unfamiliar with rarer sleep disorders. Can you briefly share about other sleep disorders and when someone should seek out a sleep specialist or a sleep study?
So yes, so a few of the more uncommon ones are parasomnias. So this is where we act out at night. An example is REM behavior disorder, where you have a nightmare and then act out your nightmare. In fact, sleep doctors have been called to testify in court because sometimes people have such terrible nightmares that they end up committing acts of violence to their partners, right? So that's an example of a parasomnia or REM behavior disorder when you act out your nightmares. Restless leg syndrome or periodic limb movement disorder. This is when there's movement in the extremities that is painful and uncomfortable and interferes with sleep. Both REM behavior disorder, periodic limb movement disorder and RLS require sleep study. The most common referral for sleep study is suspicion for sleep apnea. So again, if you are someone who is overweight, has a history of hypertension, is fatigued during the day, has been told that you snore, wake up gasping for air, or fall asleep really quickly, that does require polysomnography. Other sleep disorders include night terrors and night walking. Night terrors are when someone wakes up and screams and goes right back to bed. They're not aware that they're up. And night walking is exactly what it sounds like when someone wakes up in the middle of the night and is walking about the cabin and they are unaware of it. Those are rare, but usually require collateral interview from a caregiver. And in the case of periodic limb movement, REM behavior disorder, RLS, and apnea, overnight sleep study is often required.
Dr. Parker, thank you so much for taking time out of the day to be with us. And this has been fantastic. The chat really appreciated what you had to present.
I hope it was helpful. I hope you were able to glean at least one practical thing that you could do today to sleep and live better.
I'm sure that is very attainable. Thank you again. And a reminder, we'll be uploading a replay of this webinar onto our website. Registrants will get an email once it's ready. We'd love for you to come back for these upcoming webinars. On February 27th, we'll welcome our partners from Mission Collaborative for Designing Your Impactful Career, where we'll discover how to get more fulfillment in our work. The Science of series continues March 18th with the science of social media and AI. Dr. Parker Woodruff will explore the influence each have on our personal lives, business, and global events. March 26th, a frequent flyer of ours, Dr. Alan Gorman, returns for Leading with Heart, the Power of Compassionate Leadership, as we look at the importance of leading with empathy. And on May 20th, the last of our current set of the Science of webinars will be the Science of Sugar, Sweet Secrets Uncovered. Dr. Sophia Bees will delve into the critical role sugar plays in our bodies. Register for these and more at alumni.uab.edu/events. 2 months from today, we'd love to have you join us for our 19th annual scholarship run. We'll be hitting the road in Crestline Village on April 12th to raise money for scholarships. We have a bunch of ways you can support us, including 5K and 10K, a fun run, and a virtual option where you don't even have to run. If you don't want to, you can run if you're somewhere else, whatever it may be. Register at alumni.uab.edu/run. Finally, in an effort to always get better and offer things you'd like, let us know. The QR code on your screen will take you to a short survey for you to share your thoughts. Once again, thank you so much for joining us. And as always, go Blazers.